welcome to this video tutorial where today I'm going to show you how to make a cloak, specifically for this Lord Commissar. The list on screen are all the things that you will need to replicate this for yourself. You will notice that I've actually added milliput to this list as well. And the reason for that is because if you mix milliput with Greenstuff, it dries super hard, so your cape won't deform when it's cured. This is something that happens a lot when you thin Greenstuff out because it's still quite malleable even after it's cured if it's really thin. With that said, let's kick it off. So as you can see here, I've got the milliput and Greenstuff mix. It's about 50-50 and I'm going to flatten this using a couple of flight bases. I'm also going to use some baking parchment or baking paper, greaseproof paper, depending on where you're from. And I'm also going to apply a thin layer of Vaseline to this to act as a releasing agent from the greaseproof paper. Now you're probably wondering, why would I even bother with greaseproof paper? It just makes life easier, that's all. So I'm just measuring up the flattened mixture to the back of the Commissar. I want a certain kind of length for the cloak. Now I want it relatively thin in terms of the width of the cloak, just to look like the traditional Commissar cape, but I want it to be relatively long so that it can flow out. So this was a piece of advice I was given by a Forge World sculptor, and they use plasticine or blue tack, poster tack, whatever you want to call it, to create a mould or a form so that you can place the mixture of Greenstuff, milliput, whatever on top of it so that you can create a billowing effect. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just pressing the blue tack onto the model and then I'm going to shape it using my sculpting tools. And this is so that I can get a certain billowing effect with the cloak and create some natural folds and creases without having to mess about too much with the stuff while it's on the mould. Right, I'm just using the cling film now to wrap around the model, and the reason for this is so that the mixture doesn't stick to the blue tack and so that it comes off the model relatively easily so that I can sand it and smooth it so that I can get rid of any creases or deformities within the actual putty once it's cured. After leaving the putty to cure for about 30 minutes, it's time to start cutting into it to get the general shape that I'm after. Now I'm leaving it that long to cure so that when I'm handling it, it doesn't fall apart in my hands. If you work on it too soon, then the putty won't do what you want it to do. You need a relative amount of firmness to it so you can get the shapes that you're after. So I decided to flatten out a bit more the cape just to get it a bit thinner. I was also not happy with the width that I'd got and the shape, so I decided to just expand it out and create a bit more material to play with. Now that I can place this on the mould that I've created using the blue tack, I can start shaping it and getting the general idea of a cloak now. It's also very important that you use rounded tools for this. If you don't, then you won't get the natural billowing shapes that you will want from your cloak. In this case, I'm using ball-pointed embossing tools, and I'm using the rounded end of a needle tool for sculpting. Using a colour shaper, I'm able to smooth out the putty without causing any real indentation or damage to it. The softness of the silicone tip helps with that. It also doesn't stick to the green stuff because it's made of silicone. I wanted to create a billow fold in the middle of the cape to create that natural look as he's walking forward, as if the cape's blowing in a bit of a breeze. So I'm using the ball pointed embossing tool to just lift up the putty, and then using my colour shaper, put it underneath and then just form the cape around it. Because it's a nice big thick round shape, it creates that natural curve. One of the important things that you need to do when working with any kind of green stuff, milliput or putty is to keep working on it while it's curing, because that will allow you to smoothen the putty and create more of a final finish. If you just leave it as it is, you'll still have all those deformities and creases and tool marks, and it just won't look very good. So make sure you set aside around 2 hours to work on a piece. That way you can work on it right as it's curing, so that you can get rid of any tool marks. Now that the cape is cured, I'm going to just take it off of the mould and take all the glue tack off of the model. As you can see, the cape fits quite nicely to the back of the model, but I do need to take off a bit of excess material at the top of the cape, just so that I can get it to fit a bit nicer how I want it to. I'm also going to carve away some of the harsh edges that have been created from the forming process. That way it looks a bit more natural and smooth. As you can see here, the bottom of the cape, the underside, looks absolutely terrible from where it lay on top of the cling film or saran wrap. So what I'm doing is using my knife to get rid of all of that deformity. Because the milliput mixture is so hard, I can do that quite easily. Now I'm just giving the whole piece sanding. This is 400 grit sandpaper, so it's coarse enough to bite into the cured putty, but not so harsh that it shreds it. And all I'm doing is dry fitting, carving away more material that I don't need, dry fitting again, carving away more, just continually going back and forward. And it's important that you do this, because if you don't, the cape won't fit the way that you want it to and will look unnatural. Now I'm just going to use some super glue and just stick it onto the top of his body and leave that to go off. Using some standard Greenstuff mix, I'm just going to create the connector points for the cape so that it looks like it's held in place using some buckles. The reason I'm using normal Greenstuff rather than the milliput mix is just because I don't need to anymore. So the Greenstuff itself is a bit softer than milliput, and is in some cases actually easier to work with to get the general effects that I'm after. The process for creating this effect is more or less the same as in my other videos. Just use the metal tools to get the general shapes that you're after, and then start defining the detail and smoothing out using rounded tools so that it can be smoother. And just working back and forth, back and forth. Again, you want to be taking about 2 hours to sculpt. Right, I want to create a mantle for this guy now, so some fur at the top of his cloak. It looks really cool, it's very 40k. So if you've seen my Fellbats tutorial videos, you'll know that the fur sculpting process is going to be the same, so check that out if you haven't already. And it's literally just the same process, but creating finer fur. So for this I'm using my knife to carve in some of the shapes instead of just bluntly with my tools. So to begin with, just smooth out the putty just to get the right sort of shape that you're after, and then start carving in some fur definition. I'm also going to add some fur texture right over towards the buckle connectors of the cloak. This is so that the fur looks like it's all the way integrated onto the cloak. It looks more natural. Remember, whenever you're sculpting, it's the little details that will make the sculpt really work. And as you can see, this is how the final cloak piece looks. The cape itself is really hard and sturdy, so it's not going to deform whenever it's on the battlefield, and when it's in storage it will hold its shape quite nicely. Just leave that to cure and he'll be ready for paint. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and check out some of the other videos that I have on my channel. The next one will be coming out very soon, and until then, see you next time.